Hi, my name is Tarek Morshed. I'm a market leader at Kuper Sotheby's International Realty, and welcome to the Entrepreneurial Home Podcast. This podcast is where Austin's most successful men and women discuss their business journeys and the entrepreneurial home that empowers them to thrive in business and in life. On today's episode, we have Damon Neth. Damon is a seasoned entrepreneur, senior executive and C-level consultant with deep domain expertise and expertise in enterprise technology and world-class business processes. He's worked with organizations ranging from pre-revenue startups through Fortune 500 to achieve business processes and technology excellence. Damon is the co-founder of CXO Service Co, a premium provider of business processes and technology consulting services, where he serves as CEO and has over 20 years experience in business and technology space. And I'll add to that, Damon is also an incredible mentor for a lot of folks in the Austin entrepreneurial scene. You've just made such a huge impact.
Thank you.
And certainly on me in that same role and capacity. We obviously met through EO and Accelerator.
Yep.
And it's just been a real pleasure to get to know you over these years.
Thanks, likewise, Tarek.
By you. Yeah.
I'm really impressed with what you do in the real estate space and as an entrepreneur.
Thank you. I appreciate that. So tell us about your entrepreneurial journey and where you are now. There's this book to talk about, so I'm excited to hear about this.
Yeah, so I guess we're going to talk about my entrepreneurial journey. We would start back in the 90s. So I graduated from college in 1990, and then I went to work for a professional services firm that had a big six type model. So financial services, high-end technology consulting, and so working for that organization, I was placed in leadership roles at client sites, leading large-scale technology transformation. So kind of the easiest way to think about it is I would lead massive teams that would tear the guts out of whatever enterprise information systems these companies were using, and then replace them with a new solution. So something that was purchased, something that was customized, something that was built from the ground up, kind of whatever it took to meet that company's business needs. And as you can imagine, when you're changing the technology platform that the company uses, there's an awful lot of business process change that needs to be addressed as well. So, I would be leading teams of technology resources and bringing the technology up and getting it configured and programmed correctly to meet the business needs. And then on the business side, I'd be leading teams of leaders basically through how do we transform and take advantage of this technology, build new processes, and a lot of times solve old problems that had just kind of been languishing there without attention, but then got the spotlight of attention as we had to address process change around the new technology.
Got it. And it sounds like some of that, especially around the consulting, came almost as an impact or as a effect of the other work that you were doing.
That's right. So in about the mid-90s, the company I was working for decided the area of practice that I was involved in, retail consulting. So I was helping some of the world's largest retail brands and distribution brands with technology. They decided they didn't want to be in that space anymore. So that provided me with my first entrepreneurial opportunity, which was to basically spin up a retail services consulting company focused on technology and process. And that was, it was kind of a softball as entrepreneurs go, because I was already doing the work. All the things I was doing daily, I knew that I had the skills to do and would have to do going forward. And I had a really willing client base, because these companies said, well, if your old company won't serve us, then would you? With your new entity. So that was that's how I cut my teeth with my first company, was starting a high-end services company related to technology and process transformation for really the world's largest organizations.
Got it. Are you at liberty to share some of those names?
Oh, sure. Back in the day, so remember this was back in the 90s, so some of these companies really aren't even around anymore in their same shape. Like, for example, Kmart was a big client. They were then merged with Sears, and now they're kind of going through some gyrations trying to stay solvent. I worked for, a client was the company that invented the Superstore concept. So when you go into a Best Buy, I worked for the organization that started the first Superstore in the Northeast. So the first big scale footprint that was all electronics and appliance and things like that. I then worked for their competitor, Nobody Beats the Wiz, which was owned by Cablevision. And then a lot of kind of brand name food service companies, big nationwide chains of food service, quick service retailers, things like that.
Got it.
So yeah, the commonality in all those things was they all had needs for new or better technology and didn't have the expertise to address those in-house. which makes a lot of sense if you think about it. Like if I hire you as an IT director, you're probably really good at the specific technology we're using or certain areas where you have expertise, but when you replace technology, especially at a large scale, that's a completely different set of skills. And a lot of times that requires really high-end program or project management capabilities in addition to a lot of different types of tech skills, in addition to leadership and executive skills. And then on the process side, the ability to look at a current state, imagine a future state, and then manage the transition to be able to get there. So, a lot of times those folks just aren't on board at a company because they don't have that as a need day to day. They have it as a need when they're gonna, attack a big project like that.
That makes sense. Got it. So then what happened as that evolved?
So that was my first company. I ran that for about 7 years, all the way through year 2000, which drove a huge amount of project work. I mean, everybody was basically replacing all of their high-end systems because most were unsure if they had a year 2000 problem or not, and erring on the side of caution because at the time it was really like the doomsday scenario. The New Year's turns and all of your technology stops working. So we worked really hard to help a bunch of companies remediate technology and replace a whole bunch of related things. And that's really where the first real setback in the company, in my first company, occurred, which was once all that work had been done. If you'll remember, right on the heels of that was when the dot-com bubble started bursting. So at the time I was working with a company called PC Connection. They're a multi-billion-dollar retailer of consumer electronics goods, and at the time they were a catalog company. So if you can remember back in the day when you used to get a catalog or calls to place orders, so they were making the transition to internet, and they were just one of many companies that said, we're not sure where this internet thing is going. We don't know if it's a viable strategy for our business. So we're just going to put the brakes on everything because we just spent a whole ton of money doing year 2000 remediation and replacing lots of systems, and now we kind of feel at risk. So the whole enterprise space really dried up. Like you hear about this time, over time in different industries, like in 2008 when the financial crash happened.
Right.
I knew a lot of people in the financial services industry who wound up without work, not because they weren't talented, but because there really wasn't any opportunity. The whole space shrunk so much that it really dried up opportunity for a lot of companies like the one I was running. And kind of in good news for me, I was also really burned out. So this was, I was not only leading this company, but I was delivering services directly to some of our top clients. And so that was really kind of a grinder, like for 7 years, 60, 80-hour weeks, leading this massive transformation, pretty much always under high stress because these things were so expensive and important to my clients. And so when that wound up happening, when the dot-com bubble burst, I had this really great opportunity to start a company with my wife. So she had started a retail business out of our home. Our children were small, and she had been a retail entrepreneur. And lo and behold, it caught fire right around the same time that the technology space was getting pretty lean. Yeah. So she and I decided to work together. So I came over and worked at her company, and we eventually settled into the roles of CEO for me and COO for her. So she handled all the operations. I handled strategy and technology. And so the company was in the sporting goods space, a super niche market. We were the world's largest retailer of Frisbee type products. So disc golf discs for people who are disc golfers, or ultimate discs for people who play ultimate, but really anything related to flying discs in the Frisbee space.
Got it.
And that's actually what brought me here to Austin. Was we were running the company in the Northeast, and once we became the largest retailer and had all this deal flow going, we knew that we really wanted to be more in the center of the country for shipping and logistics and other reasons where it makes sense to be more in the center instead of on the coasts.
Oh, got it. I thought you were going to say because the Frisbee golf and just Frisbee is so huge in Austin as a scene in the community.
And that was a really large decision-making criteria too, was we had key suppliers here, and Austin is pretty much the Frisbee capital of the world. I mean, there's just so much happening here that, it's amazing. So we had a standalone store that only sold Frisbees. There's not too many markets that can support that type of retail practice. Nice. And in fact, we were doing as much as 20,000 customer transactions a year in that store, just selling plastic.
Wow.
Yeah, hard to think about. So there's not too many cities that could support that many customers, that much transaction flow, all around a very niche sport.
Yeah, got it. And it was national at the same time as far as the retail side of it.
Yeah, our reach was national through our websites. We had a brick and mortar operation, and really it was kind of more of a supply chain play than anything. While we did those things as customer facing activities, we built supply chain technology in-house, and we outsourced order fulfillment and distribution for other companies. So we were really really trying to roll up the transactions within that space from a supply chain perspective.
That makes sense. Okay. And so that was for 7 years?
Yes, that was actually for about 12 years.
Okay.
So Stacy started the company around year 2000, and then we ran it together until 2013.
Okay. Got it.
Yeah.
Got it. And then what next?
Well, so all along, even though I was really happy to be out of kind of the pressure cooker of high-end services, I always felt like I knew a lot about physical product companies, so retailing, distributing, manufacturing, but I really felt my true calling was in professional services because I really enjoy the prospect and the journey of helping others, specifically helping entrepreneurs and their leadership teams.
Nice.
And so as we ran the disc golf company, it was very funny because I kind of thought I was losing relevancy in professional services because I was doing something that was so dramatically different than what I had done before. So, you know, rubbing elbows with high-end CEOs to like rubbing elbows with Frisbee players, basically. And so I really appreciated kind of the freshness and the freedom to do what I wanted. And I thought, well, you know, I'm probably losing some skills that were really valuable from my consulting days, but I didn't care so much because my focus then was happiness, being present for my kids, getting off the road, because I was pretty much a road warrior during that time. And what I realized when we started selling the Frisbee company was that I really wanted to be back into professional services, but I kind of thought, do I really have any skills that people would want anymore? Because I've been away for it now for at least 10 years. And I realized that there was this really awesome thing that happened, which was I built some great entrepreneurial skills leading a small company through change and growth and dynamic transformation. And I was applying big company principles to smaller company problems. So we weren't just solving what was in front of us, we were kind of solving things 2 or 3 or 5 steps down the road, knowing where it would head if we were successful in each of those missions, you know, each of those steps along the way. And so other entrepreneurs, a lot of folks in the disc golf industry reached out and, you know, took counsel in me for products they were launching or businesses they were trying to launch. And they really appreciated my professional services kind of approach to things, my counsel. And so that was when I started to realize that there was a huge need for entrepreneurial sized organizations. I call them small to mid-sized companies, but really, you know, anywhere from $500,000 to $100 million is really not served by the big scale professional service market. Those tend to be more kind of bit players or specific solution providers or what have you. I realized there was this need at the top of those smaller organizations to start thinking like big organizations.
Got it.
And that's what ultimately started CXO Service Co. And that's what the name means. So CXO meaning Chief Anything Officer. So that's what CXO does is we step in and we lead organizations in different executive positions depending on their needs. So if an organization needs a chief financial officer, we'll plug that person in. If the organization needs a chief executive officer to drive strategy, that might be a role that I would take myself. Okay. So it really kind of depends on their needs, but we find a top executive talent that is matched to a company's specific needs at that moment in time as a consulting approach. So you know how hard it is to find great talent and hire that. The CXO model, if you will, solves that by saying you don't need to make a long-term commitment. What you need to do is solve an immediate problem or it might even be a long-term problem, but we want to match that talent with what's actually going on. So I say don't solve short-term problems with long-term money, right? So sometimes what you need is a specific resource right here and now to get you over the hump or get you through a transition, and then you need more of a steady state leader who's going to take it from there forward.
That's a huge nugget.
Yeah.
That's a huge nugget to circumvent either huge long-term commitments or just, you know, really focus on what actually is absolutely needed now for the organization, scale through that, and then do your next piece as it's needed.
Well, and as you know from running your business, marketing is a great example of kind of the value that high-end consultant or a specific type of service provider can create for an organization. Yeah. As you know, every day when you wake up, there's almost a new way to market, right? Right. So hiring someone to lead marketing that has a certain skill set now, that may be not the right skill set a year from now or 2 years from now, or you may have needs where that person just doesn't have expertise. Right. So the whole notion of kind of on-demand leadership is one that's really well established in Europe because of their employment laws. So decades ago, when the employment laws started to change, there became an imbalance in risk at the top of organizations where you have these really high paid executives, and you also then have now these new laws saying if you let someone go, you might have to pay them for a year or two after you let them go. So that added a lot more risk to the hiring process at the top, and that's where the interim executive movement was born. And that's what CXO does, is provide interim executive leadership to companies. And the reason it grew and was born in that environment was it just became too risky. If you made a bad hire, you might not be able to replace that person because you don't have the finances, even though they're no longer adding value for the organization. So the whole consulting at the top model started to grow, kind of like it is here in the US, first in finance roles, and then it started expanding out to other areas of the organization where, you know, people with specific knowledge and skills could come in, lead a transformation, and then step out, and somebody who's more of a, you know, everyday steady state leader could then take it from that point forward.
Nice, got it. And so how does that all tie into this book that you guys just released?
Well, it ties in pretty much directly.
Right.
So, X-Formation is the book. I wrote it with two other high-performing interim executives, William Mintz and Jim Trey-Liebman. I know both of these guys from the work that we've done and the associations that we belong to. And, you know, their approach is the same as mine, which is they are stepping into unfamiliar environments time and time again, following smoke to fire, and then leading the organization through some type of change and transformation that, again, the internal team might not have the experience to deal with themselves, or sometimes just the bandwidth, right? Like most of the clients where I show up, people aren't twiddling their thumbs waiting for me. They're busy. They got their heads down. They're doing their own thing, and they also have other needs that they just don't have the time or skills to address.
Got it. And so, where would our listeners be able to pick this up or order it?
So this has been a best-selling title on Amazon. So the book X-Formation is really broken into 3 different sections. It's designed to be a definitive guide to interim executive leadership here in the United States. And, you know, of course, the concepts scale globally, but it's a new concept here in the US, and we wrote it to kind of address that perception gap, if you will. Like many organizations or executives have never heard of interim executive leadership or wouldn't know how to use or where to find an interim. So the book has 3 sections. The first is really what is an interim executive, kind of what are the qualities they possess, how do they generally go about their work, things like that. The second section is how do we actually go about the process of transforming a company or accomplishing big challenges within an organization, because one perception that is incorrect is that an interim executive is kind of a babysitter or a placeholder until the real executive shows up. The type of work I do is based in transformation and change of companies. So if there's no meaty challenge on the table, I'm probably not a great fit. You know, I'm not really there to monitor time card punches and make sure people show up. I'm there to help the organization get to the goals that they're having trouble reaching on their own. So the middle of the book talks about like how do you do that? How do you step into an unfamiliar company? How do you get results time and time again as an interim? What does the process look like? What is an interim thinking about that you might be able to apply to your business on your own? And then the third section, because the first 2 paint this incredibly vivid picture of why everybody needs an interim. The third section is where do you find one and how do you engage one and things like that. So it's really helps the reader understand like, okay, here's how I might find someone, here's how I might assess their skill sets to my needs, and then here's how I go about the process of engaging them, budgeting for them, things like that.
Got it. The word hack keeps coming up.
Yeah, totally. It's like people call it a life hack. Yeah, it's like a business hack, right? Yeah. You know, sometimes a hack almost has the feeling or the perception that you're cheating. Right. And I would say this is just a really focused deployment of resources for specific high-end goals. So, you know, it does wind up kind of feeling like a cheat because most organizations are used to walking a really painful path down those types of activities. And for me, you know, this is my life's work, and so I'm never typically kind of concerned or out of sorts or have high drama or energy around it. I'm approaching this like we're going to be successful. We've got to build a roadmap and execute it. So I'm kind of taking some of the emotion, a lot of times, some of the stress and risk out of these things for organizations by helping them walk what is for me a proven path.
No, that makes a lot of sense. And I know from my personal experience and some of the mentorship and mentoring you've done with our group, it's exactly what you've described. Is you've got an amazing ability to really come in and provide a business hack, not as a cheat or a workaround, but as a way to leapfrog and really grow and scale.
Yeah, it's really more like applying best practices that are dialed into your specific situation,
Exactly.
right? A lot of times you read books on best practices and you think, these are great ideas, but what would I do with them? And that's what I'm helping companies do, is dial in the approach to solve their specific problems.
Yep.
Again, backed by experience that takes some of the risk and the unknowns out of it, so that it feels more like we're walking a path that we all understand and that we all believe in and that we're all doing it together. You know, that's probably another perception, is that I swoop in and it's the Damon show or something like that. Not at all. I mean, there's still a team there. There's employees. Like, you know, the company should run like the company runs. I should just be adding value in areas where they don't have that knowledge or they, bandwidth to do it themselves.
That's great. That's great. That's great. And I think this is kind of maybe a nice segue here. This question being around, just your actual workspace and your environment. So, in your opinion, how important is an entrepreneur's surrounding environment? Whether it's at home, in a co-working space, and how all that's set up.
Yeah, well, that's a great question. For me, it's critically important. So a lot of my work is done remotely or on-site with my clients, depending. So I don't have the need for a traditional office space. Like, it wouldn't make sense for a company to come to me, right? It makes sense for me to go to them, see how they're doing their work, interface with the whole company and all the employees, not just one or two people in the C-suite. Like, I'm typically getting my hands kind of dirty, and that means I go to where the work is.
Yeah.
But that doesn't mean that I don't need a great workspace on my own, because I do probably about half of my work from my office, which is in my house. And so for me, the workspace is incredibly important. Like, if you were to come to my office, you would see I've got 4 monitors simultaneously hooked up to one workstation, 2 at another, and 2 laptops. And we pretty much have all 8 of those screens going all day long. So I'll typically have 4 active windows where I'm taking notes, looking at like a website or some sort of IP or collateral. I'm building online documents or project plans or things like that for companies. And then I've always got my email and my calendar up, because that's like the most dynamic part of my world, is being responsive, and then also setting the next follow-on action or appointment, and really managing my time hyper efficiently, because that's my real only commodity, is time. So if I burn cycles that aren't productive for my clients, it doesn't really move anybody forward. And of course, in addition to all that, I have the responsibility and the efforts associated with running a company. So my wife and I, Stacy, have run 4 companies together. This is our 4th. And so once again, I'm in the CEO seat and she's in the COO seat, helping create enablement. But for us, it's all about efficiency. So we've got one office that we share with a peninsula style workstation, or a desk in the middle, and we've each got our own workstations, our own thing, and we're able to communicate effectively, have meetings right across from each other. When calls start, I just turn and I've got my full setup. But that winds up being an optimal approach for me to be hyper efficient when I'm in the office and need to get things done.
So the idea of really open space and being able to see your team members, not just see them, but have them be very accessible. But it also sounds as
a lot of video conferencing too.
Got it.
When people are out in the field and we need to connect, things like that. So we're trying to use all the modern tools that are available and kind of reimagine what work looks like. Focusing mostly on being nimble and being able to create value wherever we're at. Like, that's what the laptops are about, is being able to show up at a client site and be just as productive, minus the 4 monitors, as I am at my home office.
Right. Well, and it's interesting you talk about having all those monitors set up, because the first thing that came up for me was, wow, that's a lot of space, but it actually sounds like it's a great way to create a very effective workspace, because a lot of times we're shuttling between technology or software or different platforms. So you've got kind of all your main platforms up and ready around you at all times.
Absolutely.
And it sounds like that's a big time saver, and actually setting up your workspace that way. That's pretty cool.
Yeah, it is a time saver, and it also creates value when I'm working remotely too. Like, if I'm using GoToMeeting and we're having a strategy session or something, a lot of times I'll have documents up that I'm referring to that we're not specifically talking about, that I'm using to try to draw the strategy together or something like that. And I may just, the team, we might be having a communication barrier, I might be trying to make a point that's not hitting, and then I can just instantly share a different screen. This is what I'm talking about. I don't have to fumble around and look for it or email it to them. Can you guys open this up? It's like, boom, this is what I'm talking about. And it really helps make that distance seem smaller.
Yeah, no, that sounds, that's a nugget for me. I like it. I'm just realizing that, I've only got 1 to 2 screens set up, and I'm losing a lot of time efficiency and creativity because I'm having to start and stop. Again, as entrepreneurs, that's huge.
Yeah, and that was the trigger for me that I needed more monitors, was when I constantly found myself not having enough real estate to keep all the things I was working on open at the same time.
Right.
Just an inefficiency, and that's, as a process efficiency expert, that's a go-to move, is anything that's repetitive, is there a way that we can make it less repetitive or reduce the time that it takes each cycle?
Nice.
So once I found myself fumbling around time after time, I said, I've got to take a page out of my own book here and get some better capabilities.
Yeah. Nice. And let's see here. Do you have any hacks, talking about hacks or tips, to get into the flow of work at home or in a co-working space? And what I mean by that is, a lot of times there's either interruptions around us, and there's a way to kind of maybe police that so you're not interrupted, or so that you can really have a certain time of day where you are able to really get into your flow of creativity and production.
Yeah. So with time being my primary commodity, I use the calendaring tools very heavily. Mm-hmm. So I really schedule out all parts of my day, even stuff that is not client related, even things that are personal. Like if I need to go make a car appointment or whatever, that time doesn't just magically make itself available. So, I'm actively scheduling pretty much every minute of the day so that I can fit all the things I need to in there. And that's also a really powerful tool for managing how allocated you want to be, or how utilized a person wants to be. If I can't find a spot on my calendar for it, then it means I'm either signing up for overtime or things that would not fit into a normal work week. Which is fine, but a lot of times people don't realize when they're running out of capacity, so they're taking on more and more commitments, and then they're just kind of left to fight through them. I prefer to kind of manage the time a little bit more, or at least have acknowledgement that, this is going to take time that is not Monday to Friday, 9 to 5, because I've already got too many activities planned there. So, my hack would be hyper calendaring and really committing to that. It's really a necessity for me. But I think for a lot of people that struggle with that, they don't often see the value in taking the time to build out a calendar.
Right.
And as a result, they typically have things that are kind of all over the place in terms of personal, family, work commitments, kind of all being blended. I use it as a way to kind of sort those things out and make time that is not just work time available for other things that I enjoy.
That makes sense. You're actually making me realize that as my business has recently changed in some ways, and we're expanding in some arenas, that I haven't actually adjusted my calendar for that in the same way. So I very much, like you, follow a very similar mantra around hacking and calendaring. But I think there's an important lesson to remember as we also grow and scale, because that has impacts on your business life or personal life, that then you almost have to kind of readjust that same hack strategy on your calendar.
Yeah, that's what I've learned. And then, as a more kind of maybe practical hack for how is it that I, lead so many different projects successfully, or, project's probably the wrong word. I mean, I'm leading transformations. A lot of times we call them projects, but it's really, we're accomplishing top level company goals. And so my proven process for those always starts with what I call an approach document, which is simply stated, the hack is decide what you're going to do before you do it in as much detail as you can. A lot of times that's the stuff that gets glossed over, and that's what I learned leading these massive technology projects back in the 90s. I didn't mention it, but my specialty was actually rescuing failing technology projects. So a lot of times I'd show up after they'd already worked for a year or burned $1 million, whatever, and they were asking me, can this thing be saved? In going through that, what I realized was, it was never once in massive companies, massive tech projects, never once was it the technology that wasn't able to get the job done, or even the teams. It was misalignment between business goals and what we were doing. So why are we replacing your ERP software? I mean, what is the purpose? And it can't just be because it's old and needs to be replaced. There are business goals in there that need to be really not only defined, but we need to shine a bright light on them so that the teams understand this is what success looks like. We can implement the greatest system, but if it can't accomplish X and Y and Z, we will have failed.
Makes sense.
So the approach document is really about what is it that we're trying to accomplish from a business perspective? Just what are our general goals? What's the scope? How much are we willing to spend? What areas are going to be included or not included? Just basic stuff.
Yeah.
What are the resources? Who's the team that's going to actually put energy into this? And it could be internal, it could be external, it could be both, all those things. But by defining these things in an approach document and sharing them openly with the executive leaders at these companies, I do one of two things. I either get all the heads moving like this, which means we're locked and loaded for execution, or objections come out, and either scenario is perfectly fine for me. I'm just as happy with an objection as I am with a let's go forward, because an objection that's unstated is lying in wait to bite you at the least opportune time. So I just want to drive all that stuff out as early as I can. Okay. And so once we have that clear vision of what success looks like, now execution becomes a lot easier because we have something we can go back to and look at.
That's great. And that's called the approach document.
Yeah.
I like that. All right. So how have your entrepreneurial needs impacted your home environment?
Absolutely. So, my wife and I run our companies and our families kind of as a conjoined unit. Like we wanted to be there for our kids, wanted to be there for our employees, wanted to be there for each other. So, our home life and our work life are pretty tightly intermingled. Okay. But, like to your point about having some hacks, over the time we've had to develop some go-to moves so that life doesn't become our whole work or the only thing we talk about at home. But we created great space where we could close the doors and have, a quiet conversation or a call with a client or whatever, even if stuff's going on in the house. We have optimized our office for the business of work and not the business of home. Things like that. So I think we've taken a thoughtful approach about balancing the two and, really seeing it as an opportunity to bring all of our different lives and needs and demands together. Sometimes it's a little bit of a messy, pot, if you will, but for the most part, it works out pretty well. We try to encapsulate the different things that we're doing so we can be there and be present for our kids or for each other or for our business.
That's great. And can you say a little bit more about when you say you've optimized, I forget how you phrased it, but almost something along the lines of optimize it for your home office or something like that.
Yeah, so I think some people approach the notion of like having a home office as either this is my home office that I'm also going to do business in, or this is my business office and really not a lot of home business happens here, or the two just step all over each other and it becomes kind of a mess. So our office is primarily designed for the business of work, since that's what we do there. We also, of course, pay our bills and stuff, but we try to segregate those things into their own space, segregate those things into their own time, and so that when we're there, like to your point earlier about how important is the workspace at home for an entrepreneur, it's easy to sit down at your desk and see 10 different things that are related, 5 of which are personal, 2 are family, and 3 are work, and just suddenly feel like you're working on all of those at once. I prefer to try to work something beginning to end and then move on to the next thing, and that's a discipline that I've built over time by being overwhelmed by so much that needs to get done at a time. So I think it's important to be able to understand how to segregate those components of your life and make them work for you. What works for Stacy and I is not necessarily going to work for other people, but we've kind of been honest about what would work, what wouldn't work, and how would we then make specific changes designed to enable, all those things. And part of it too is just also, working with and not against, the family rhythm. Like when the kids are away at school, that's the best time to do work, right? It's harder when they're home raising ruckus and things. Some people kind of rail against that. Stacy and I are pretty pragmatic. Like let's try to make these things work in the ways that they work more naturally, and kind of keep the flow going.
That's great. Thank you. This has been really, really valuable. Just incredible amounts of information and hacks and I think really important pieces to share with other entrepreneurs. So it's been a huge contribution to the show. Really appreciate your time. Anything else you want to say about the book or anything else? Any questions?
Thanks for having me. I'm really honored to be here. It's great that you took such an interest in me and my business. And I'm always excited to get out and tell more people about kind of what I do and how I do it. I feel like that's part of my responsibility, to the community is to share ideas and help people along their journey. As you said, I get involved in a lot of mentorship programs and things like that. So it's great to be here, and it's great to kind of help you on this journey. And I guess in terms of kind of like parting thoughts or whatever, people can find me online. The book is on Amazon. And, I'm always excited to meet other entrepreneurs and understand the journey they're on, the challenges they're seeing, and, lend a helping hand whenever I can, even if that's just over a coffee. And that's, one of the greatest things about being here in Austin is such an entrepreneurial scene. I mean, there's so many people out there who are just innovating, transforming, doing it on their own terms daily. I've never been part of a fabric like this that has so much entrepreneurial energy behind it. So I feel fortunate to be in this community and to be able to see great folks like yourself on a daily basis and just, get a little peek inside what's going on in their world and their journey.
Nice. As I call it, it's the most collaborative entrepreneurial community in the country, in my opinion.
I would agree.
And so
100%.
And I think a lot of us in this community actually see you as such an integral part of that, given the amount of mentorship and the value you bring to so many companies around here.
Oh, thanks. I appreciate that.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's nice to hear.
Yeah.
It's my life's work. I feel every day that I'm lucky to go and do it. So that's what's foremost on my mind is how can I keep doing more of this.
Nice. I like that. Awesome.
Great.
Thank you, Damon.
Thanks, Tarek. Great seeing you.
All right. Take care.